This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. An expert on Russia and Syria says whether we know it or not, it might be best for the West, Israel, and Russia if Bashar al-Assad remains in power. Regular contributor Catherine Poe thinks that President Obama has gone off the rails and let the Republicans define who he is. And Bill Press talks with political science professor Larry Sabato. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. George Mason University Professor Mark Katz is an expert on Russian foreign policy and on Syria as well. He examines the geopolitics of the uprising against Bashar al-Assad and has a surprising analysis. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Mark Katz is a professor of government and politics at George Mason University, where he does research and teaches classes about Russian politics and foreign policy, revolution, and the war on terror. He recently wrote an article outlining 4 myths about Russia and Syria. Professor Mark Katz, thanks for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks so much for having me.
As an expert on Russian foreign policy, can you explain why Russia seems to be the only powerful nation supporting the Assad regime in Syria?
That is an interesting question because certainly, although China supports the Assad regime, it has made clear that it will be willing to work with the opposition should they come to power. That the Chinese have certainly hedged their bets on this, but the Russians have not. They have doubled down on Assad. And I think that part of the explanation isn't simply the foreign policy calculations, but Putin's domestic policy calculations. I have one good friend in Moscow, a long-time Russian Middle East watcher, Georgy Mirsky, and his argument is that Moscow would rather support Assad to the bitter end, even if he falls, than be seen knuckling under to Washington, changing course on Syria, and seeing a long-time Russian ally fall for the benefit of supposedly better relations between Russia and America. That this would make Putin look weak with the Russian public, and more importantly, he would view himself as weak. Therefore, he prefers to support Assad, and he sees American hesitancy as an opportunity to win this one. I think also, that the Russians actually, what they really feel is that whatever comes after, however bad Assad is, that whatever comes after him will be worse. It will not be a democracy, not that they want a democracy there to begin with, but that it will be a radical Sunni regime which will be anti-Russian, anti-Western, anti-Israeli, and that in fact that Russian support for Assad is actually in the West's best interest, even though the West doesn't quite understand this yet, and that they actually think that they are performing a service to us all.
So there are no strategic interests, say militarily wise, in Syria for Russia, or I mean, is it just let's continue the Cold War by opposing whatever America wants, as you sort of alluded to?
There are strategic interests. I mean, there is this naval facility. Now, it's pretty modest, although that doesn't mean it's not important to Russia. It is the only naval facility that they have outside of the former USSR. But I don't think that, even if this wasn't present, that they would still support Assad. Similarly, they have some economic relations, but in our terms, it's just absolutely peanuts. In fact, even in Russian terms, it's pretty small, although important economic interests are at stake, politically powerful ones in Russia. Certainly, the idea of opposing the United States is important, I think, for Putin. Whether one sees this as part of a Cold War mentality, I'm not so sure. What's more important, I think, is that that this is what makes Putin look good domestically, that there is a resentful constituency, nationalist constituency that resents Russia's loss of great power status, that America is very much blamed for this, and that opposing the U.S., I think, is something that makes Putin look good internally. And that's reason enough, I think, for him to do this.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Mark Katz, professor of government and politics at George Mason University, where he does research and teaches classes about Russian politics and foreign policy. What about Iran? Is its support for Syria simply part of the continuing war against the Sunni-dominated nations of the Middle East, or is there something more to it?
Well, I think that has a large part to do with it. That's certainly that Iran does have some allies. There's obviously Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's the Assad regime in Syria. Curiously enough, one of his better friends is the Maliki regime in Iraq, which the U.S. helped bring to power. That these are all Shia governments, and that they are at odds with Saudi Arabia and with not just the conservative Sunni Arab forces, but also the forces of change. In other words, that I think that from the Iranian point of view, the Arab Spring, which they thought was going to be friendly toward Iran and anti-American, has proved really to be neither in terms of the change we've seen so far in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Yemen. And now, of course, the opposition is aimed against a very important ally for Iran. If Assad falls, then it'll be very difficult for Iran to maintain the same level of support that it has for Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so I think for the Iranians, they see an awful lot at stake in the survival of Assad, and of course the opponents of Iran, Saudi Arabia in particular, they also see an awful lot of stake, and that they see an opportunity to knock off a vulnerable Iranian ally, and they think that this is in their interests as well as in the West's interests.
You mentioned Hezbollah. They're now here. It's a fragile, at best, Lebanon being yanked into this as well. I mean, this whole scenario seems to get uglier and uglier every day.
I'm afraid so. That the Syrian conflict is now involving Lebanon. It appears to be spilling over into Iraq, helping fuel Sunni-Shia conflict there. Obviously, the huge refugee flows into Jordan appear to be damaging that country's economy and possibly stability. It's also not good for Turkey. That this, I think, is the problem, is that if this conflict continues, will it be contained to Syria, or will it involve a wider Sunni-Shia confrontation, which will be very difficult to control?
What are the ramifications for Russian foreign policy from its large internal Muslim population?
Well, certainly the Russian authorities have cited the Arab Spring as they've seen it as somehow aimed at Russia, as aimed at encouraging Muslim opposition inside of Russia to the Russian government in the North Caucasus and also other Muslim regions, up along the Volga, Tatarstan in particular, where there's an awful lot of oil. Now, I think the real case is that what happens in Syria doesn't really affect what happens in Russia. In other words, that what happens in terms of relations between the Russian government and Russia's Muslims has more to do with Russia's own policy toward its Muslim citizens than whatever the outcome of what happens in Syria. And I think that for the Russians, they don't treat they don't treat their own Russian citizens well. They certainly don't treat their Muslim citizens well. But the Russians government has had, way back to the 1990s, they have blamed all their problems, whether it was with Chechnya or in the North Caucasus, on outside interference. Especially they blame Saudi Arabia in particular. It's quite interesting. The Russians tend to look at Saudi Arabia the same way that America looks at Iran, that there's just nothing good to be said about that country and that they regard it as very threatening. And so I think that in many respects that they may be bringing about a self-fulfilling prophecy that the more they crack down in the Arab world, the more they help the Assad regime and groups like it, the more, in fact, that they might encourage Sunni governments and Sunni groups to retaliate by helping their fellows inside of the North Caucasus, and that Russia will actually, simply worsen its own problems as a result of their support for Assad.
Okay. Now, before we let you go, what are the proper criteria for U.S. intervention in other countries? For instance, why Kosovo and Libya, but not, say, Rwanda or Syria?
That's an extremely tough question, because the truth of the matter is that if any one of them is worth intervening in on humanitarian grounds, then probably all of them are. But of course, we can't launch humanitarian interventions everywhere. There are simply too many cases, and how does one decide? I think that if there's an answer, and I'm not even claiming it's a good answer, is that we would probably do this in cases where our allies are more willing, and hence we saw Kosovo, which obviously is in Europe, and our European allies were more concerned about. Unfortunately, Rwanda wasn't located anywhere near our European allies, and so there wasn't, a Western outcry for intervention there. Similarly, I think that one of the explanatory factors for our intervention in Libya is that it's just that much closer to Italy, to France, that they were especially concerned about what was happening there and what the ramifications would be for them. And so they were very eager for intervention there, whereas they are less so with regard to Syria. So I think that unfortunately the international relations of it, the inter-allied relations, often determine this. But I think if one wants to look for a moral distinction, I don't think one can find one. That if any of these cases deserve humanitarian intervention, then probably they all do, but one cannot do them all, and so it's a terrible and terrifying choice, I think.
Okay. Mark Katz, Professor of Government and Politics at George Mason University. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to speaking with you again soon.
And thank you so much.
It was nice to have you here. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Catherine Poe is a progressive blogger and a regular contributor here. She has some advice for President Obama: work on a jobs program and stop doing 3 things at once. That's coming up in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
One thing I've come to value in the last couple of years is the altruism and keen economic insights of the 4th richest man in America, Charles Koch. Even though Koch was raised rich and has now amassed a personal fortune of about $34 billion, He recently gave us a deeper sense of his true worth, measured not in dollars but in values. We want to do a better job of raising up the disadvantaged and the poorest in this country, he declared. Excellent thought. FDR couldn't have put it better. Noting that a big problem for the poor is that the powers that be, quote, keep throwing obstacles in their way, Koch cut to the chase, saying, we've got to clear those out. Yes, Charlie, I'm with you. Clear out such barriers as the offshoring of middle-class jobs, union-busting, poorly funded schools, and the lack of affordable health care, housing, and child care. Good God, no, barked Koch. It turns out that he intends to help poor people by eliminating, ready, the minimum wage. Why? Because, explains this clueless son of the rich, having a wage floor, quote, reduces the mobility of labor. In case you don't dwell in the plutocratic, narcissistic, Ayn Randian fantasy land where the Kochs hang out, labor mobility is right-wing psychobabble for social Darwinism. Remove all remnants of America's economic safety net, they coldly theorize, while wallowing in their nests of luxury, and the poor will be freed to become billionaires. As Charles puts it, with no protections, the disadvantaged would have to scramble just to live, thus freeing them to, quote, start a business, drive a taxicab, become a hairdresser. This is Jim Hightower saying, what a visionary he is. Where you see massive, debilitating poverty, he sees a brave new world with millions of billionaire hairdressers. And the Kochs wonder why they're considered kooks.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Our regular contributor, Catherine Poe, thinks President Obama has gone off the rails, at least in terms of pursuing progressive policies. She says he has let the Republicans define him and that he needs to focus entirely on a comprehensive jobs program. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Catherine Poe writes the Ad-Lib blog for the Washington Times Community. She is a former president of Long Island NOW, and she was selected by Progressive Maryland as one of the top progressives in the state, along with Senator Barbara Mikulski and Congresswoman Donna Edwards. And, of course, Catherine, also a frequent contributor to americasdemocrats.org. Catherine, as always, nice to speak with you again.
Yes, good to talk to you.
Now, after winning re-election, things don't seem to be going as smoothly for President Obama as he had hoped. What went off the rails?
It seems like several things went off, because he really had like a great jump start. I mean, wonderful State of the Union, right? And then he was really out there in front of gun control and all of this, and it was looking really good. And he had a strong, what looked like a strong agenda, and that he was going to really do this. And then I think he made this mistake, and he didn't make this mistake during the campaign. All right, he didn't make that mistake. But one of the things he did, even in his first term, he starts letting Republicans define who he is. And I'm not even getting in yet to these quote scandal things, but just define who he is, and sort of saying, this is beneath contempt. I'm not going to deal with it. And I don't mean he had to be reactive, but basically, it seems to then what happens to him is if they define him, then he's not defining himself with issues. And I thought that was going to happen with gun control because he was so good and so forceful. I mean, anybody who saw him, he can move you to tears, all right? But he sort of dropped the ball. I mean, Congress and the Democrats needed him, and he lost. I mean, that was a major loss for us in the Senate when that did not pass. And that sort of took the wind out of his sails of what he's going to do. In fact, now, of course, immigration is probably going to be very iffy, which I've always thought it would be. I definitely don't think it'll ever get through the House. And I heard some people say it's these chiefs of staff. They're not doing their job, what they're supposed to. They're not writing on things. They're not on top of stuff. I don't know if that's really the problem or not. It just seems to me that he keeps hopping from message to message and not when he gets an issue, he doesn't stay on that issue and hammer it home until it is home, until it's passed. And I think he loses a focus, and he sort of like moves on to something else. Last week was a very good example. He was talking three different things. And I think American people need a consistent message, and that you're hammering all the time on that message. And, that's my take. But by the way, I should add an interesting fact. Zogby, according to Forbes, just came out with a poll, and Obama's approval rating is 53%, according to Zogby, and that's the same as it was when he was elected in November. And in fact, it actually went up a little bit from last month, and it has jumped 5 points with Republicans. So I'm going, what? So of course, this is one poll, and it's a snapshot, but still,
right.
It's like, okay, there is definitely something going on. Maybe the American public are not as critical as the rest of us are, or particularly like Democrats like myself are going,
right.
Come on, what are you doing?
Well, we often hear of Republican obstructionism. But is this possibly maybe the president's own characteristics as a weak negotiator coming forth?
I think so, because and it's funny, because coming out of the Senate, you would have thought, even though he wasn't there that long, but still you would have thought that he would have known how the Senate works, kind of schmoozing what you have to do. But we know that and to be a strong negotiator, you actually have to have a relationship with the people you're negotiating with. And from day one, he didn't have a good partnership with his own Democratic Party. I mean, Nancy Pelosi talking about in the first few years, well, I never even got a phone call from him. I mean, that's crazy. These people should have been up there all the time at the White House talking and confabbing. And then, of course, if you don't have it with them, he certainly didn't have it with Republicans. And then when he would try to do it, it always looked sort of phony, like, okay, John Boehner and I will go play golf, okay, photo op, that kind of thing. And I don't think he had the salesmanship he needed then to negotiate these things. It's sort of hard to say no to somebody that you have a nice relationship. Maybe you're more apt to compromise, but he never built that. And I think that has come back to haunt him, and even more now in the second term than it probably even did in the first.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Catherine Poe, who writes the AdLib blog for the Washington Times Communities, of course, a frequent contributor here to americasdemocrats.org. Are you among those, like myself, who weren't surprised to find out Republicans actually welcomed the sequester?
Actually, I was surprised.
Were you really?
I was surprised
now that does surprise
that
me.
It didn't hurt them. I was actually surprised it did not hurt them.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a misjudgment on my part. I actually thought the president calling their bluff was really smart, and they were going to be backed into a corner. But I didn't realize that the cuts, when they came, would be rolled out over a long period of time. So it wasn't like they came and like the guillotine came down and you saw the results and it was devastating for everybody. Instead, it comes in bits and pieces and a little bit here. And, people are inconvenienced at the airport, and the people have to go on furloughs. But I don't know anybody on furloughs because I don't live in that part of the country where they're on furloughs, say. I think, and that's why the Republicans got away with it. And, of course, then we start talking about it, it looks like Obama caused it, and not who really is at the root cause of all of this. So, and of course, again, that only emboldens them. And then, of course, they want to make exceptions to certain pet projects. We can't have the sequester, say, for this in defense. We don't want those long lines at the airport, so we'll take that. So they start looking like the good guys. So it was funny because for me, I was surprised that the Republicans didn't pay a price, and that I don't know whether they figured this out themselves or they were just being their obstructionist self, and it happened.
Yeah. And
they're probably as surprised as I am.
No, they got away with one, that's for sure.
They sure did.
Now, let's turn to something here. How serious are the so-called scandals over the IRS, Benghazi, freedom of the press? What do you think is the most serious in your opinion?
Okay, well, several things. One is if I was just watching the news, whether it was Fox or MSNBC or, regular evening news or reading the newspaper, I would have thought these are really horrible, serious things that the American public just isn't tolerating. And again, the Quinnipiac poll came out, and they showed that basically Americans are saying these are not important issues. And that it was like, and what for them, when they asked them what it was, if you compare what is more important than any of these, and by 73 to 22%, they said it was the economy and jobs. And that, boy, if Obama doesn't start taking this message, that's what they care about, and there's your message to go, pound home all the time, is because, and then when you asked him, just take on the three issues, what are the most, vital, which are the most disturbing, and the IRS came up first, and that makes sense because everybody hates the tax collector in any form. So that was the first one, and then Benghazi was the second, and then this probably surprises everybody in journalism, the Department of Justice going after journalists and AP records and all that. That's last, way last, like only 15%. And then to add to this, the Benghazi thing, which I always thought was bogus anyway, it turns out that about 43% to 32% of the people think it is that it is just something that the congressional Republicans made up, and it's just part of politics, and they don't even take it seriously even. So it tells me that while we're all fired up, and obviously the two sides are, but the average person is not that whipped up over any of this. All they care about is the economy and jobs, and that's what they want taken care of. So I thought that was sort of interesting that. What I think is most serious, most people in America don't.
Interesting. So now let's take a look at what does the president have to do to salvage a successful second term? He's had all these bumps in the road, but he had bumps in the road in the first term, and he managed to win a second term, of course. So what does he have to do? I mean, where does his legacy go?
Yeah, right, and that's a big worry for him right now. I mean, because everything from judicial appointments to, getting gun control passed, getting immigration reform, to improving the economy, which is stalling out basically because the Republicans have not cooperated with him on this. But again, I have sort of come back to the salesmanship and making the American public understand. Yes, he's on your side, you 72%, that he cares about jobs and the economy. And that's where the concentration has to be. And I think what he has to do is actually submit an amazing, in-depth jobs bill, particularly for our infrastructure, which everybody agrees. Our airports are an embarrassment. I mean, anybody who's ever come into JFK knows that, how bad that is,
right.
As compared to coming into some wonderful airports around the world. I don't mean just at Dubai, but with everything from Paris to Singapore, and the roads and the bridges that keep falling down. I think, and those are very specific things because you can actually, they're concrete. And that's not a pun, but they're concrete. You can really see them, and I think that's where he has to, and that's what he has to be out selling. Not three things in 1 week. Every time he goes out, that's what he talks about. No matter where he is, he doesn't like, scattershot, which he's sort of like been doing. I think you have to stay on message. I think that's why gun control lost, because he then began moving to other messages. I think he has to stick to one message and then dare the Republicans to vote this down. And there are going to be some very, very angry American voters if they start seeing this. But I think that's what he has to do. I mean, I keep talking about he had to focus more. I think that's what it is. Get his focus sharpened again. I think that would salvage it. But he only has so long before technically he becomes lame duck in 2014.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully he's listening to this program. Catherine Poe writes...
I'm sure he is.
Catherine Poe writes the Ad Lib blog for the Washington Times Community, regular contributor to AmericasDemocrats.org. Catherine, as always, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to doing it again soon.
Okay, me too.
Take care. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, University of Virginia political science professor Larry Sabato.
So everybody's talking about 2014. In fact, a lot of people are already talking about 2016. But hey, not so fast. There are two big governor's races coming up right here in 2013. One in New Jersey, one in Virginia. The one in Virginia proving to be quite colorful, not so much because of the candidate for governor, because of the candidate or the governor who cannot run for re-election. We wanted to check in on that and a whole lot more with our good buddy Larry Sabato, director of the Center for Politics down at the University of Virginia. Larry, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bill. I'm always happy during scandals.
Yeah, we don't we all love it. So listen, Larry, before we get to the politics of the day, I was just wondering, you've been a good friend for a long time. So my son's getting married, and it's kind of, Carol and I are having a hard time putting all the money together to pay for this wedding. Do you think you might be able to help? Write us a check maybe?
Well, I don't know about that, but I tell you, I've got a new book called The Kennedy Half Century, which is the perfect wedding gift.
Oh, wow.
Man. Do you notice how I worked in that plug? Was that pretty good?
Yeah, I'm excited about this new book.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about that. But,
okay.
But so, seriously, if you're governor of Virginia, and there's a businessman who says, "Oh, your daughter's getting married. Let me pick up the tab." I mean, why wouldn't you think this may not look right?
Well, it's far more less. That is a great example, but let's remember we're talking about now accumulated total of well over 200,000 from this one person who was not an especially good friend or a friend at all, really.
Nobody had some
McDonald's.
business, but he had business in front of the state, right?
Exactly. I mean, come on. Oh, he's just a friend. He just cares about us. It's amazing. I've lived longer than Bob McDonnell, and I never meet these people. Who throw a couple $100,000 my way because they care.
Johnny Williams, man, too bad you didn't run into him. So, but the point of it is that does this the scandal of the McDonnell scandal slop over onto Cuccinelli?
Oh, absolutely. Look, we live in a polarized partisan era, and the two most important letters in the English alphabet are D and R, and the R connects McDonnell with Cuccinelli. Had McDonnell maintained the popularity he's had during the vast majority of his term, and his popularity has ranged upwards of 60%, which is about what he got in the election, I would have said Cuccinelli was favored. Well, guess what? He's now down in the low to mid 40s, and I think he's falling because people are just gradually learning about this scandal. Half of the people of Virginia still don't know enough to even tell you what the scandal is. So it tells you they haven't focused on it. But the half of the people who have focused on it have been very critical of McDonnell.
And there's no evidence, is there, that Cuccinelli took money from Johnny Williams?
No, he took vacations from him, and he had stock in Star Scientific, which was the company. So, no, there are very direct connections between Cuccinelli and Johnny Williams and Star Scientific. He stayed in Williams's home.
I got it.
Johnny Williams paid for, I think, a Thanksgiving dinner for his family. No, there are direct connections.
So there's no way he can distance himself from either McDonnell or Cuccinelli.
Well, he hasn't taken money.
Williams. Yeah.
He hadn't taken money to the extent McDonnell had.
Yeah.
And he's already tried to put some distance between himself and McDonnell because the truth is they hate one another. They've never gotten along. They fought throughout. And remember, McDonnell didn't want Cuccinelli to be the nominee.
We've said this before about people that, and it looks like in this case, Terry McAuliffe may be the luckiest politician in the country, right?
The old statement applies to all of us. It's better to be lucky than good.
Exactly. I was surprised in this latest poll that I saw, which is the public policy polling, PPP poll, where McAuliffe is up, but only 4 points over Cuccinelli, Larry.
Yes, and that's actually down a point from May, but the Libertarian candidate in this poll is getting 7%. And frankly, the reason is people aren't terribly excited about either one, candidates.
Huh? Yeah.
I mean, they have serious problems. Everybody I run into says, "Oh my God, how did we end up with these two?" And my answer is, well, one of these two is going to be governor, so get used to it.
Yeah. Now, speaking of outgoing governors, Rick Perry, not running for re-election, but saying, I'm leaving the door open to 2016 because that worked so well the last time, right?
Well, absolutely. Absolute old Governor Oops is probably going to run again. Although I hear different things. He wants to run, and yet he's also running into some resistance from people who are telling him, hey, Governor, you're not going to win. Look at the lineup for the Republicans in 2016. It's probably not going to go your way. So we'll see whether he actually decides to run.
I mean, there's certainly more. We remember in 2012, right? It was like he was going to be the savior, right? He was the one. He had this executive experience. He was the governor and everything. And then, boof, boy, did that fall flat. But he'd have tougher competition this time around where he'd jump in.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
He had his moment in the 2012 contest where he could have gotten a nomination. Republicans didn't really want Romney, and look at the gang of Lilliputians running. So that's not going to be the case in 16. He's going to have real competition. So I don't see how he gets a nomination.
Now, let's talk about a Senate candidate from Wyoming. Hey, Dan, get us we'll share again with our viewers and our listeners, Larry. Here is the exciting video released yesterday by daughter Liz.
I've been honored to have had the chance to speak with so many of you about your concerns, your fears, and your hopes for the future. I've listened carefully and discussed the possibility of running for office at length with Phil and the kids. Today, I am launching my candidacy for the United States Senate.
Not in her home state of Virginia, but in her adopted state of Wyoming.
And she was in an undisclosed location while she gave that announcement. It could have been a field in Virginia. It could have been a field in Wyoming. Who knows?
Right. Chances?
Well, look, I don't rule out the chance that she'll push Enzi right out of the race. Mm-hmm. He's at the point, he's at 69, he'll be 70 next year. He might decide it's not worth, having to run a really tough race. But if he runs, I think he'll beat her. My early read is that people are responding in Wyoming, wait a minute, why should we oust this guy? And people mention this issue and that issue, but truthfully, they agree on just about everything. So why do you lose 3 terms worth of seniority just because the daughter of a former vice president decides to run?
Decides to move to the state. I mean, she does have some connection to Wyoming, but...
Look, just a few years ago, Bill, she was seriously investigating running for the U.S. House from Northern Virginia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And I mean, her resume, she was a contributor to Fox. She did have a job at the State Department, but short of that. And again, Enzi, unlike... People are trying to make... Some people are making the parallel. Well, look what happened to Dick Lugar, right? Or look what happened to Robert Bennett in Utah. But, I mean, Enzi's more a real true conservative, isn't he?
He's a solid conservative. I mean, I don't see... She'll pick 2 or 3 things. You know how it is in primaries.
Yeah.
They get vicious because there really aren't many differences. So you have to malign the other person.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go after them as individuals, and she'll find 2 or 3 votes to run against.
Right.
And then it'll be a matter of, money and also how the people there in that very individualistic state respond to this challenge. Do they like the anti-establishment character of it, or do they say, no, we're perfectly satisfied with the guy we got?
Yeah, we like our guy. I got to say just one final thing. I mean, listening... I haven't looked at the video, but listening to that, I mean, she sounds like she's reading it. There's no, I mean, she's really, really, really flat. I don't think there's somebody, you hear that and you say, oh, I want to know more about her. All right, so tell us about this new book. We'll do a whole thing on the book, but when's it come out? And go ahead.
Coming out in October, a month before the sad 50th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, the Kennedy half century. It covers everything from the rise of Kennedy, his campaign in '60, his administration, the assassination, and who did it. But what makes this book, I think, unique, other than what we have found about the assassination, which is new and which is not a theory but is actual fact and evidence, we have Kennedy viewed through the lens of the 9 successors. How did the 9 successors in the White House use John F. Kennedy to accomplish their own goals? And that's the focus of the Kennedy half-century.
So the half-century is the half-century since Kennedy's assassination.
Precisely. That's the focus of the book, how Kennedy's legacy has played out through other presidents. He didn't have enough time to develop a legacy on his own.
Right.
Other presidents have helped him develop it in order to help themselves. So I think people will find it interesting. It's up on Amazon. Right. You can pre-order it, and I know you're going to give that as your main Christmas gift to your thousands of friends and associates.
I've already pre-ordered 100 on Amazon. Hey, so listen, you say you have new information on the assassination. Who shot him?
I can't tell that. It's going to be released at the press conference that we have in October at the museum.
Well, we are glad to welcome our guest, Larry Grassy Knoll Sabato.
I didn't say it was from the grassy knoll.
All right, Larry. Always fun to make the rounds with you, my
Thank
friend.
You, Bill.
All right. He's at the Center for Politics down in Virginia, centerforpolitics.org. I wonder what the hell's in that book. Ooh.
Bombshell.
That's intriguing.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Mark Katz, Catherine Poe, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org